I'm back, y'all. Hello, internet. Today I'm going to be finally doing my April wrap-up. Like I said in my last video, I was in the process of fixing to move, and so I was going to be taking a little bit of a break from YouTube. But now I have moved, and I still have a lot of unpacking to do, but as you can see, I've unpacked my shelves, and I found my tripod and my camera, and I finally have internet now, so I thought it's time to go back to YouTube. So since it's like the middle of the month now, I'm not going to do anything about like a TBR for this month. A, because I've already posted my TBR for the A to Z readathon, which is basically my May TBR. There were a few books that I had started reading in April that went into May that I have either finished or am still reading in one case, but I'm not gonna bother talking about those. I'm just gonna wait because soon I'll be doing a May wrap-up, so this is just going to be my April wrap-up. But anyway, April was a pretty decent reading month for me in terms of I really liked the books that I read. I read 8 books, and I was kind of surprised I was able to read that much with how busy I was with trying to pack and everything, but I liked pretty much everything that I read, which was great. Also, bear with me, I'm not a huge fan of the lighting situation right now, so I'm gonna have to kind of play around with that the next few videos. I've got like this huge window right over here next to me, and I might try to finagle the blinds a little bit to change the lighting up a little bit. But anyway, this is a long enough intro. I'm gonna get into the wrap-up now. The first book that I read in April was Moon and Rising by Leigh Bardugo, and this was the final book to the Grisha trilogy. It took me forever to finally get to reading this book. I liked it. This definitely wasn't my favorite book in the trilogy, but I did think it was a pretty solid ending. I do kind of feel like there could have been more as far as like the final, I guess, battle, if you will, for lack of a better word, but I did overall like the way that it ended. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm so glad that I finally finished this book. The next book that I finished up in April was Faking Normal by Courtney Stevens, and I picked up this book back in March because I met Courtney Stevens at a book festival here in Tennessee, and I really just enjoy listening to what she had to say, and so I wanted to pick up something by her. I'm so glad that I read this book. I really loved it. I thought it just had a very like raw and honest voice to it, and I really appreciated that. I loved the relationship between Alexi and Bodhi and how they were able to be there for each other during each other's traumatic times. It was just a really amazing book, and I highly recommend it. Although I would like to put a trigger warning on this book for sexual assault, self-harm, and abuse. But I'm really glad that I read this, and I am really looking forward to reading other books by Courtney Stevens. The next book I finished in April was The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace. And this is the very first poetry collection I've ever read, and I'm really glad that I chose to read this one first, that this was my introduction to the genre, because I really loved this. It was a really emotional collection of poems. Some of them I really identified with, and I don't really do this in books, but since this was a poetry collection, all of the ones that I really liked or that really struck with me, I actually folded the corners down so that way I could go back to them. I ended up drawing some of them in my journal. I really loved this poetry collection. If you like poetry, I definitely recommend picking this one up. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I just really loved it. I'm looking forward to what else Amanda Lovelace puts out. I hope that she puts out more of her poetry. The next book I read, I was so excited about. I've been reading this book for what feels like forever, and I finally finished it. And that book is, if you can probably guess if you watch my channel, but that book was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I started this book like 2 years ago in the physical format because I was just in the mood for classics. And the thing about classics is I like a lot of them, but I have to be in the mood for it. And I read like the first maybe 50 pages or so, and then I just stopped. And I wanted to read something else, and I would pick it up and read a little bit at a time when I was in the mood, but it just got to the point where it was taking way too long for me to read it, and I couldn't even really remember the beginning of the book that well. So I made the decision to pick this up on audio and just start over from the beginning. And oh my gosh, was that the way to go. I loved the audiobook so much more than I did reading the physical book. Not that her writing is bad or anything like that. It's just, it was a lot easier for me to get immersed in the story in audio format versus trying to read the physical book, and I ended up really enjoying this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really loved the story. I watched the movie when I was really little, but I want to rewatch it now that I have read the book because I think I would really enjoy the movie. And I'm so glad that I finally finished this book. It's not sitting on my nightstand anymore. It's finally on my shelves. Y'all, you don't even know how good this feels. Next it was time for Tome Topple, and I did not do very good during Tome Topple. I had 3 books on my TBR. I started 2, but I only finished 1, and the one that I did finish was my graphic novel pick. But it was a really good graphic novel. I chose to read Blankets by Craig Thompson, and I kind of just went to the bookstore and picked this one up on a whim because it fit the criteria that I needed for the readathon, and I didn't know anything about it, but I really enjoyed it. This is actually kind of like a graphic novel memoir because it's about Craig Thompson's kind of like earlier years during childhood into like him being a teenager, and it's mainly a love story. There is some kind of like graphic content in here, but I thought it was a really great story. I'm really glad that I read it. I thought it was really cool that he chose to tell his story in graphic novel form, and I really liked that part of it, knowing that I was reading something that actually happened. I will say I wasn't a huge fan of the ending because it just felt very abrupt, and I would have liked a little more, but I also respect the fact that it's his story about his actual life, and he needs to tell it the way that he feels like he needs to. But I would have liked to know more. This is mostly a love story, like I said, and it was a really great romance, and I really enjoyed it. If you like graphic novels, or if you're like me and you're just kind of, you're still like new to the genre, I think this is a good one to pick up. And I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. This is a book that I've been wanting to read for a really long time, and I really loved it. And it's about a girl named Emmy, and she's very interested in the film industry. She has kind of grown up around it a little bit, and she kind of does like production design and stuff. She's got internships for it, and she's going to be going to college for it soon. But there's this really cool like mystery element that happens to it, and Emmy ends up crushing really hard on this girl. Emmy is bisexual. I don't know. That was probably a really bad synopsis of this book, but I really loved it. I've been looking for more LGBTQ contemporaries that our own voices, which this one is, I believe. I'm not 100% sure how Nina LaCour identifies, but I do know that she has a wife. But I really loved this story. It is a little hyped on BookTube for people that do read this genre, and so I did have high hopes for it, and I felt like it really met them. This became one of my favorite contemporaries, I think, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And also it's beautiful, and it's pink, and pink is my favorite color, and there aren't enough pink books. The next book I finished was a reread for me, and it was my other audiobook that I listened to this month, and that book was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I decided that I wanted to reread this after finishing the Grisha trilogy to kind of see if there was anything that I missed since the first time I read it. I hadn't even read the first book in the Grisha trilogy yet, and there were a few things like mentioned in here that I was like, oh, I know what that means now. But definitely you can still read this without reading the Grisha trilogy. I'm reading Crooked Kingdom right now, and I'm not very far into it, so I can't say for sure if the same goes with that book, but I really enjoyed rereading this book. I actually ended up upping my rating to 5 stars because I just forgot how much I loved this book and these characters and the story. I think it was at either 4 stars or 4.5 stars when I read it last year, but it's now at 5 stars. And the audiobook was really good. There was a different narrator for each person's perspective because this book is told in multiple perspectives, and so each character had their own narrator, and I thought that was really cool, and it kind of helped differentiate how they viewed things that were going on and that kind of thing. But I really enjoyed the audiobook. Highly recommend the audiobook if you haven't listened to it yet and you are a fan of audiobooks. But this is probably one of my favorite fantasy books, and like I said, I'm reading Crooked Kingdom right now. I can't wait to finish it. I think this will probably become one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. So, yeah, 5 out of 5 stars now. And the last book I read during Dewey's 24-hour readathon. Since it was at the end of April and it was right before I moved, I really just didn't have time to read a lot. I only read one book, and I read it basically when I was taking a bath. But that book was Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and this is another poetry collection. This is a pretty popular poetry collection, and I get the appeal for it. It just, there were a lot of poems in here that really I didn't connect with because I feel like I haven't experienced enough to really fully get this poetry collection, if that makes sense. I would like to go back and reread it when I get older and I've experienced a little bit more, but I definitely still enjoyed it. It just didn't really have the same meaning for me as it does for a lot of people, but I am glad I read it for sure. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and if you like poetry, then if you haven't read this yet, you probably would want to, but this one's pretty popular, like I said. So that's it for my April wrap up. That took way longer than it should have. I feel a little rusty at this YouTube thing, so it might take me a little bit of time to kind of get used to doing it again. But let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them, and I will see you guys next time with a new video. Bye!